Recorded live in Los Angeles, California, welcome to the Kid Dangerous Office Hours podcast, where KD President Steve Nanino interviews cool people doing even cooler shit.
All right, cool. Well, I would like to welcome John Rankin from Boomtown Brewery. He is the official first guest of the new Kid Dangerous podcast, Office Hours.
Woohoo!
So the basic premise of Office Hours is we know a lot of cool people doing cool stuff, and we just want to get to know them more and share some of their stories with our audience. So our fan base, they love pop culture, they love art, they love music, and right at the top of the list of their favorite things is alcohol and beer. So I thought
at the top of a lot of people's lists.
Exactly.
I think.
I thought what better way to kick off this than to interview a good friend of mine. Boomtown Brewery is located right in the heart of downtown LA in the Artist District. So if you are local or make it out to Los Angeles anytime soon, you should definitely come by because it's pretty damn awesome. And that's not being biased. So
Lots of fun stuff to do here and in the neighborhood.
So welcome, John. We appreciate you taking the time to meet today.
Sure, Steve. Pleasure, man. Glad to be here.
So we got to know each other through a mutual friend, Brett Cranston, who knows probably pretty much everyone in this city. But I don't know a ton about you still. So where are you from originally, and how did you end up in?
I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. So I mean that's basically where I'm from. I spent my 16th year in Dallas, Texas, when my whole family moved down there, but my parents split, and I moved back to St. Louis and moved to New York City when I was 20, and spent several years in the city, and then went to culinary school in upstate New York. So most of my 20s was spent in New York, and then I moved back to St. Louis for about 3 years, running a nightclub there with a bigger group called, at the time, it was Angel Music Group, and then they, partnered up with Hakkasan, and they're a much bigger company. But anyway,
Oh, dang.
I moved out to LA about 9 years ago.
So was this 41. Pre or post Nelly St. Louis era?
Post. Nelly really put St. Louis on the map.
Yeah.
And, at least that was for me moving to LA, but I moved away. The first time long before that. St. Louis is a great city. It has a very small town feel for as big as it is, and I wanted to explore, so that's what I did.
Awesome. So you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but after school, what kind of career jobs did you have before Boomtown?
Truly, it's all I've done my entire life is hospitality. I mean, I started as a prep cook when I turned 15. My parents were in a financial situation where if I wanted any money, I had to work for it. So
yeah,
that's what I did. And then, from prep cook to busboy to server to, busboy, bar back, then server, bartender, bar manager, general manager, so on and so on. Until finally I had moved out to LA and I managed a few different successful restaurants and was ready to embark off on my own. And I was looking at some different restaurants to start my own thing, and that became Boomtown Brewery.
So were you always a fan of like the beer scene happening in Southern California, or how did you end up at Boomtown?
I've been in and out of the beer scene. I've had phases, as probably a lot of people. I mean, there were years where I didn't even drink beer, and then there were years where I drank nothing but beer. Scotch was a really big one for me for a long time, and
as it is with many of us,
still is. Pretty much anything smoky for that matter. I love mezcal. I love tequila. I mean, the only spirit that I don't really love is gin, but I will still drink the shit out of some gin in a good cocktail.
That's my liquor of choice. Right
is that right? That's where you're at.
It's not for everyone, but for some of us.
Again, it's not. I don't dislike it. It's just not my go-to.
Yeah, totally.
But back to the beer thing. I was looking at a few different restaurants with one of my partners, and we were really close to sending off an LOI, a letter of intent, on a space that we found on Melrose that we were both excited about and had visited a few times. This is after looking at, half a dozen spaces throughout LA, from Studio City to West Hollywood to, whatever. And he was like, okay, Johnny boy, he's like, good shit, I'm excited, we'll move forward. I got to run downtown to this meeting at the brewery, but I'll get this off tomorrow. And I was like, oh, cool. What brewery are you going to? And he's like, the brewery I'm opening downtown. I didn't tell you about the brewery? I was like, no, you haven't told me about the brewery. I was like, hold off on the LOI, man. I was like, I want to see what you're doing with this brewery, you know? And so we made the trip downtown, and they hadn't done anything. They'd just signed a lease on a space and had a down payment on some equipment. And I met Chewy, his partner, and they had been going through the process in Hollywood. But, at the time, there were no breweries in Los Angeles. So there was like one, and they went through hell and back trying to get their place open, because when cities are not familiar with an industry, they just clamp down and make it as difficult as possible. So it's particularly when it comes to like alcohol manufacturing.
Yeah, totally.
So the first like 5 breweries all had to jump through these insane hoops, us being one of them, in LA City, and certainly helped pave the way. Angel City, Eagle Rock were like essentially kind of the first 2 before us. Downtown, Mumford and Sons opened right around the same time that we did. Arts District opened about 6 months after we did, and now there's 12 breweries downtown.
Oh, wow.
All within the last let's say 5 years. So it's kind of crazy.
So from the time that you walked into that door with your partner to the time that you guys were serving your first beer, how long did that take?
Much longer than one would expect. The city was super challenging, and we had a couple gaps in financing. So we were just kind of really putting it together as we went. And I mean, it took about a year and a half before we started brewing beer, and it took another year until we opened the tap room. So we got into the market selling beers, like keg beer, to restaurants and bars first, because we knew we could get that functioning more quickly and with less headaches and less money. And so that's what we did. And then that kind of helped us limp along until we got the rest of the financing that we needed to open the tap room, which was really, as we knew it would be, the game changer for the amount of money that we were making.
Yeah, I can imagine. So during that time, what was probably like one of the biggest lessons you learned from when you started till like you started to have some success?
I think any entrepreneur pretty much learns the first thing, their first time out, the same thing, that you just have to keep showing up. You just keep having to do it. There are times that are super exciting, and there are times that are super frustrating, and times that are scary. And I had at the time my second kid was born, and my wife had just left her company, was starting another one. So financially, I had a lot of money wrapped up in this, and there were times that it didn't necessarily look like it was going the right direction, and super scary.
Yeah.
And losing sleep, and you just keep grinding and keep trying to figure out how to patch holes and moving forward, until you get to a place where it's really functioning, and then you're never done. It's just
it's always the next thing,
it's more efficient. You have more employees, and there's bigger overhead, and you're making more money, and it's
a new set of problems.
Set of problems, but it's worse problems to have,
So where did the name Boomtown come from? I feel like it's a fantastic name.
Oh, thanks. Naming is always such a process, I'm sure, as you guys found with Kid Dangerous.
Yeah.
And for some people, maybe it's easier, but, we all didn't necessarily see eye to eye. Initially, my partners wanted to call it the Hollywood Brewery because it was in Hollywood, and Hollywood is obviously internationally such a name, and et cetera. But in Los Angeles, Hollywood's kind of like
Totally.
It's got a kind of a stigma, and and technically we weren't in Hollywood anymore.
Yeah.
So I felt like that was disingenuous. And I guess you could say that Hollywood is a state of mind, but I think Hollywood is much cooler outside of LA than it is in LA.
Yeah.
And
were there any other close calls with the names?
Yeah, I'd have to look at my list. Part of the problem is that a lot of beer people, they're not, some of these guys live in like smaller towns or smaller cities and
Yeah.
and they have not a lot to do other than sit around and think about great names. So,
Totally.
you start Googling things that you love and they've all been taken up in one form or another. You get down deep, and then you find yourself going down this rabbit hole of things that you've made connection after connection after connection. And then you look back and you're like, where did this even stem from? I don't even know how I got here.
Yeah, totally.
But we knew that we wanted it to be LA centric, and we knew we didn't want to just go for the obvious. I think Angel City is great, but we didn't want to be in that same vein.
Yeah, like playing off the word Los Angeles.
And what a lot of people don't know about Los Angeles is that it was one of the original boom towns on the West Coast. Way before the gold was oil and silver. And so those were two natural resources that were plentiful in Los Angeles, and that's why people initially started moving here. And that's kind of where the downtown started from. And then, Vignes, John Vignes, or Jean-Louis Vignes was the first viticulturist, winemaker in Los Angeles. And our brewery is technically on what used to be his vineyard.
Oh, that's awesome.
Boomtown encompasses, what? I mean, a boomtown, by definition, is a booming town, a city that sees exponential growth over a certain period of time, a short period of time. So if somebody finds gold and other people hear about it, essentially overnight you have hotels, restaurants, hardware stores, real estate offices, bankers, and all these, different things that make a community run.
I feel like that's kind of a good segue to my next question, because on a much smaller level, I feel like there's a boom town that's happened in like the artist district. So when you guys picked this location, it looks like an amazing decision now, but back then it was probably taking a little bit more of a risk. How did you guys end up picking this area? And it seems like it worked out pretty well.
It did work out really well, I would say. We spent a lot of time looking around. They looked around for a year probably, trying. After Hollywood, we realized that without the M2 designation for manufacturing, that in order to try to go through the process of turning it into something that could manufacture alcohol was going to take a year and probably $1 million, and it wasn't worth it to anyone to try to go through that process. So this building had come across the desk, and my partners looked at it, and it's 17,000 square feet, and they wanted a certain price for it, and the price was decent, but at that much square footage, it was still a pretty good number. And so my partners were like, "Great, we love it. We'll take half." And they said, "No, we're not going to subdivide it. It has to be the whole thing or nothing." And so essentially, a year later, they went back and said, "We'll take the whole thing at half price," and they said yes. So it was a phenomenal, turn of events that landed us here. In this much square footage. Initially we were looking for
now I feel like
3,000-4,000 square feet, and we have 17,000 square feet. So immediately the whole scale of the operation, quadrupled. The Arts District is, in my opinion, there's a lot of cool stuff happening downtown, but in my opinion, the highest concentration of cool stuff is in the Arts District, between the restaurants, clothiers, art galleries. There's cool stuff all over downtown, particularly, in the last couple of years, all of downtown has really sprouted. But, to me, the Arts District is to downtown LA what Brooklyn is to Manhattan.
I would agree with that.
There's, it's just kind of off the beaten path, but has all of the artistry and ingenuity of people that are scrappy and just kind of doing it themselves.
Well, it seemed like it was I used to work in commercial real estate in downtown LA, and it seems like it's one of the few areas that someone was kind of like a blank canvas. There was like empty buildings or warehouses that were being converted, whereas in more of the central part of LA, even like the historic core and stuff like that, there's a lot of stuff there already. And here it was almost like there was more opportunity to like put your fingerprints on it.
For sure, and part of that was due to the city, right? There was all these abandoned buildings, and so people were basically squatting, and there was so much of it happening that the city passed an ordinance saying that within the Arts District, you can live, work, and have these like live, work spaces, which were not technically legal previously.
Yeah.
So that opened the door for a lot of developers to come in and do these kind of mixed-use units or live workspaces, lofts, et cetera, which kind of started the quote-unquote gentrification of the arts district, which, of course, as per usual, pissed off a lot of the people that were living here at the time because it was pricing them out of their existing situations, but also brought in a lot of, cool, worthwhile stuff. So
yeah, no, it's crazy to see.
Like
I've been coming down to like Worst Couche like 10 years ago,
Yeah.
and it was kind of like one of the few things.
I think it was like the only.
And
an Earth
now to
Cafe,
see that walk around that street, it's like there's just so much activity. It's so awesome. So
Yeah, it's crazy.
So I feel like the hospitality industry or the bar industry is in some ways kind of like sports or music, where it's a big passion of people, and sometimes when they get in it, it's a little bit different than their perspective of it as like a fan.
When
like
you
of
turn your
sports.
passion into a profession.
Yeah, so like, some people that get into sports no longer are paying attention to who's winning and losing because their job is sports or like music or
to
stuff
manage
like that.
the
So
bigger picture.
how has owning a brewery changed your outlook on like bar culture in general and just drinking in general?
Well, I haven't had a drink in almost a year, so that's one thing.
Nice work.
Thanks.
I haven't had a drink in about 5 seconds.
Yeah, finish that beer up. But that wasn't, when people find that out, they actually want to know how I run a brewery without drinking, and my response is always the same, which is my drinking isn't what made me a successful brewery owner, and it certainly hasn't hindered my management of my business. If anything, I'm sure it's helped it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I'm, a more even-keeled person, and I have some of the smaller things bother me less, and I have more time to then focus on the bigger picture. And but largely for me, it was about health, and I just wasn't feeling healthy. I'd spent a couple of years really grinding away, building a business, and I think it's probably a good thing that I decided to do this in my late 30s, because if I'd done this in my early 20s, I might have drank my way right out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
But, having a family and having kids keeps a certain focus on you. And yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, it hasn't made me love it less or more. It's just particularly because I've been in hospitality all my life.
Yeah, totally.
Running a bar where I have ready access to as much alcohol as I want is not new.
Yeah.
But really being concerned about, I've always been concerned about the bottom line, even running other people's businesses.
Yeah.
But, it's just when it's your bottom line, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I can imagine. So most breweries seem to have two goals. You have the distribution arm, and then you have the selling on site arm. It sounds like the selling on site came as like the second phase. Do you think in order to have a successful brewery these days, you have to have both?
I mean, to some extent, it depends on what you want to do with your brand and how much you want to scale. There are plenty of like brew pubs that are really successful. They're essentially restaurants that brew their own beer.
Yeah.
And if 70% of what you sell is liquid as opposed to food, and 60% of that 70% is your beer, and your margin, instead of being 60%, is 15% cost, then yes, you make, by that rationale,
totally.
much more money, and we expanded very quickly in the market, with the idea that we wanted to become kind of like LA's beer, and we knew that there was going to be a lot of competition with that. So being able to expand and get into as many, you call them handles. How many handles do you have in the market? It could be one handle at one restaurant. You could have 3 handles at one restaurant. So the more handles that we had in the market, the better. The challenge with that is that it's expensive growth. To put in more fermenters and more infrastructure and more labor to be able to produce that much beer gets expensive. So the return on that type of beer and that margin is a long time. As to where, if you continue to build more tap rooms, you net a lot more money more quickly.
Yeah,
so our focus has shifted from expanding in the market as rapidly as we were to now our second and hopefully third tap room within the next 2 years.
So I feel feel like in the beer culture, you hear a lot about like the success stories, like the Ballast Points or the Golden Roads that have, become somewhat household names. But there's also a lot of breweries that have closed over the years. If you were to give advice to like a new brewery, like what would be like one thing you would tell them to like do, or to principle to live by, to like give themselves a better chance to succeed?
I mean, as far as one thing, it's kind of hard to pin down, but I'd say like the top three things would be, really refine your product, know exactly what you're trying to put in the market, and how that's going to differentiate you from any other product.
Totally.
I would say make sure that you understand what it is going to be like to be really fully capitalized. We were handicapped by being undercapitalized, and that created a lot of issues for us and elongated the process. So make sure that you're fully capitalized,
Yeah.
I mean, if you wait, you might never get started, but,
Totally.
Understand the bigger picture of what it means.
For sure.
And I would say, make sure that you are in partnership with people that and their work ethic, and like who's really dedicated to the project, and who's going to do what it takes to move you forward no matter what, because it is a long, hard road.
Yeah, I can imagine. Once you see all this, you think it's easy, but no one realizes what it took to get here in the first place.
I mean, when I first walked through with friends of mine, of course, everybody like nods and smiles and is like, "Oh yeah, man, it's great. It's gonna be really cool." Not until years later, after they see it fully functioning and firing on all cylinders, do they come clean and they're like, "Dude, when you walked me through this rat trap the first time I was here, I thought you were insane." I thought there's no way. Like they just didn't see the vision. They didn't get it, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it from the moment that I walked the space the first time. And I think a lot of that comes from having been in hospitality for so long. I know placement of things and things that work and how to make things work. And I mean, really very little changed from the very first time I walked through and thought what I wanted to what we have now.
That's awesome. So last business question. Where do you see Boomtown in 5 years?
Our 5-year projection is to be over 12,000 barrels. We're right around 4,000 for 2018, so we should triple that or more. And ideally, we'll have realized somewhere between 4 and 6 new tap rooms.
That'd be awesome.
Throughout Southern California. If not pushing into Northern California, but definitely 1 or 2 more in Los Angeles, and then potentially down in like maybe Orange County or North Santa Barbara, somewhere around there.
So onto a little bit more fun stuff. So we, Kid Dangerous is going to be doing an artist collaboration with you guys. We're really excited about it.
Yeah, us too.
So where did you guys come up with that idea, and like how long have you been doing it for?
We've been doing it for a little over a year. This is our 8th collaboration. We do them essentially like 6 times a year, basically.
Yeah.
It was an idea that I had pretty early on. From the design of, for the overall design of the tap room and the event space, I knew what I wanted. But there's always like little tweaks here or there. I knew that I wanted to do a mural on this wall, but I didn't know what mural.
Yeah, totally.
And so that type of collaboration came into play pretty quickly. And, I think collaboration has a lot to do with the success of our business and the overall design and kind of our overall ethos. We love to collaborate with cool, creative people and figure out ways to make something fun and cool together that we can both get behind and feel good about. So for us, bringing up and coming artists or working with established artists, friends, some of the people that, the first artists that we work with were the people that did the murals around the brewery.
Oh, that's awesome.
So the first 4 that we did were the first 4 murals that we had put up. And then our graphic designer as well, that helped develop the brand with me. And I think it's just a cool thing for us to do. We knew we wanted to release beers, periodically, in can in that way. And what better way to kind of make that an opportunity to showcase some other cool people, and then have it not just be about the beer, but a little bit more of an event that would draw more notice from the community and also support the community. Than to do that.
We'll be giving an announcement when the official Kid D Boomtown Brewery party will be happening, but it will be fun.
For sure.
I'm looking forward to it. All right, so
I'm looking forward to this one. This is our first time doing a collaboration with a clothing brand.
Yeah.
So, you guys are obviously artists in your own right. So, for this one, usually we do a hat and a t-shirt, or, maybe sometimes just a t-shirt or just a hat, and we should be able to roll out with quite a few really fun things this time around.
Absolutely.
So that'll be cool to watch that come to life.
You do the beer and we'll do the gear.
Absolutely.
I didn't just come up with that. I said it earlier, and so I was like, I gotta use that line in the podcast. All right, so the final question is that, no one can work in the bar industry or the beer industry for too long without having a good drunk patron story, a story about someone or at some point doing something really bad in this facility. So I'm just curious, do you have one of those stories?
I mean, define bad.
Well, funny.
Illegal, funny,
something that you can look back on and laugh at years in the future.
I mean, we had done a festival, one of our very first festivals, and it was long, grinding hours at this festival that didn't end up being very busy, and we weren't making very much money. And so finally, by the third night, I left a couple of people in charge of it and said, well, you guys just get the reefer truck back to the brewery, lock it up, make sure the brewery is locked up. I'm going to go home and spend this night with my family. And everybody was like, yeah, cool, no problem. So I came down the next morning to help unload the truck and walk into our event space to find a naked girl in the corner charging her phone, a naked dude on the sofa, still passed out. Turns out to be one of my employees, and I'm like,
nice work.
Hey, how's everybody doing? And so, gave them a few moments to put themselves together.
I respect
and then
that she went to check her phone, but didn't feel the need to put on any clothes.
Yeah, totally.
That's very liberating.
I mean, she was the only one here, and he was passed out. So
yeah,
what did
totally.
it matter?
Why the hell not?
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with us. I'm really excited to see what we come up with here on our collaboration. And thank you for being the first guest ever of the Office Hours podcast.
Anytime. Thanks, brother.
Boom.